You're watching BNN Bloomberg. I'm John Ehrlichman. All morning long, we've been talking about these tensions with landlords and tenants, particularly in provinces like Ontario. And this week, the Premier, Doug Ford, making good on his warnings to landlords, announcing plans to ban evictions of commercial tenants eligible for emergency aid. Ed Sonshine is the CEO of RioCan REIT, has a very good handle, obviously, on all of these issues right now, and is living this day to day of just having these conversations. Ed, always nice to have you with us. I would like to just start with the significance of the Premier's announcement this week. What has been your reaction to it? What does it mean?
Well, I think it was unfortunate that he felt he had to do it. But at the same time, I understand it. I think he was under a lot of pressure from a lot of small tenants who had perhaps smaller landlords. But again, it was probably premature in some ways, although maybe things are happening already, because he shouldn't interfere lightly with commercial contracts. But the fact of it is, every significant or even medium-sized landlord that I'm aware of is fully intending to participate in the CECRA program. And it really has only gone live in the last week or so. And then there's a delay because I know, for example, we expect to have about 2,000 tenants at RioCan eligible, and we've made it very clear right from the beginning of the program announcement that we intended to fully participate. But the tenant, at the same time, we need paperwork from the tenant. That's just being really literally sent out as we speak, because it was only really became available over the last few days from CMHC. And so I thought it was a little premature, but I understood. I do think it's going to create some problems because the way it's presently, two problems. Number one, the way it's presently enunciated, it protects from eviction through to the end of August any CECRA eligible tenant. And unfortunately, no landlord is really in a position to know exactly who's CECRA eligible, because number one, two things, the one thing the landlord, I guess, can know is how much the rent is. So the rent has to be under $50,000 a month. That's a matter of fact. It's easy to determine. But the other two basic requirements are that you have to have lost 70% of your revenue. And again, in some cases, that's very clear. If a salon, for example, is closed, then presumably they've lost it. There's a presumption. But restaurants, we have no idea what type of takeout or delivery revenue they're doing. So again, we don't know if they're CECRA eligible. And the third qualification is being an entity that has less than $20 million in revenue altogether. And that's something we're also not able to know. So it put landlords in a position over the course of July and August, when the CECRA program has actually ended, so to not know who you can evict and who you can. So that may lead to some unfortunate mistakes, some litigation, some false sense of security on the part of some tenants. It's also raises with me anyway the issue, and I'm sorry for going on so long, but there's a lot of issues that do come out of it. What do you do with a CECRA tenant who does not pay the 25%? Because just to remind everybody, the way the CECRA program works is the tenant pays 25%, the landlord forgives 25%, and then the federal government makes a forgivable loan to the landlord for the other 50%. So, can you not evict somebody if the tenant doesn't even pay the 25%? Maybe that'll come out in the when legislation is actually proposed and we see the details. But that's an issue. The other thing is, 25% for a lot of landlords, when you're including, keep in mind, taxes and common area charges, which is actually money that's out of pocket. It's a lot bigger hit than 25% of the basic rent to landlords. And that's why, for example, Quebec has actually stepped in and said, you know what, we will pay half of that 25% to the landlords Number one, it makes it more attractive, but it actually, like I say, the impact on the landlord is a little larger than that 25% number of net rent that everybody throws around. Long answer to a short question.
Well, as you highlight, there's a lot of moving parts here. It's not an easy one, and I wish we had a little bit more time to dive into it. Before we go, Ed, though, I did want to circle back on something you've talked with us in the past, because this gets confusing, because are we talking about tenants who are big or small, or Canadian companies, or say foreign companies? And you had made a comment, and we can show the quote board, basically on what you had talked about with some of the U.S. players you perceived to be big U.S. tenants that you were working with, and you were concerned. Hopefully we can show you that quote board. There it is. Some of the larger American tenants, who I think have better balance sheets than ours, just didn't pay when others did. That was back in April. And I know there are companies like The Gap who have been in legal battles with landlords in the United States. Ed, can you just update us on that issue and how you've been resolving that issue?
Yeah, first of all, let me just to carry on that quote, which is very accurate. The vast majority of our good American tenants, and we have come to arrangements with, and very satisfactory from our point of view, and a lot of the tenants I was talking about in that period have in fact now put themselves into good standing. The Gap is part of a larger issue, which I think the entire apparel sector really is an issue. It's not just The Gap. We have come to an arrangement with The Gap that is satisfactory and it's amicable. Things are sometimes a little more difficult in the United States because in order to actually close up or evict a tenant, you have to sometimes go to court. It's a bit of a more involved process. Simon has a particularly difficult thing because I think they have in the neighborhood of 400 Gap stores. So they're a very major tenant. But the entire apparel retail sector is difficult. They miss spring, and now they may miss summer, particularly in Ontario, where they're still not really able to open for anything other than curbside. And so I suspect you will see more lawsuits of a similar nature, not with The Gap in our case, but with apparel tenants in Canada and particularly Ontario, and I suspect you'll see more tenant failures as we've in that particular sector. It's uniquely hard pressed.
Yeah, no doubt. It is a complicated time. We do appreciate you, Ed, shedding some light on a complicated story with us. Ed Sonshine, the CEO of RioCan REIT, joining us.